Ever stepped onto land so cold it bites your bones? Where even silence seems frozen. That's where Eva found herself, Montana's Iron Range. Snow blew sideways, sharp as knives, across miles of open plain. Fence posts leaned like tired old men, and in the distance, a tiny cabin puffed smoke like it was trying to stay alive too. She clutched her coat tighter and stared ahead. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Eva was no stranger to kitchens. She'd cooked through heat waves, floods, and a brief stint in a mining town where the pots were bigger than her dreams. But this job, this felt different. They said the ranch needed someone who could cook and keep quiet. She figured it was just tough cowboys needing stew and bread. She didn't know she was stepping into the middle of something legendary. You ever get that feeling like you're being watched? Not in a creepy way, more like someone's weighing your soul. That's how it felt when she first walked into the cookhouse. The place was old, smelled like smoke, sweat, and spilled coffee. And standing there, arms crossed, was Flint Archer, the ranch foreman. Hard eyes, square jaw, looked like he'd been carved out of the land itself. He said, "If you want this job, prove you can feed 30 men before sunup. If not, the next coach will take you right back where you came from." No smile, no handshake, just a test. What Ava didn't know, and what no one told her, is that the man who had hired her was already watching. Dressed like a ranch hand, boots muddy, eyes calm, he kept quiet. His name, Cole Rivers. But around these parts, the Rivers name held weight. He owned the land. Every fence, every steer, every inch of the ground she walked on. She thought she'd taken a cooking job. What she'd actually done was walk straight into a storm. And not just the kind made of snow. Stick around, because what happens when a cook with a spine of steel meets a land full of secrets? Well, that's where this Wild West romance truly begins. Prove it by sunrise. The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the wind howled like wolves, and flakes danced against the windows like ghosts. Inside, Eva rolled up her sleeves. 30 mouths, one cook, no backup. She opened the pantry, barely stocked. A couple sacks of flour, dried beans, a few onions clinging to life, and 2 sides of salted beef that looked older than she was. The stove smoked more than it burned, but Eva didn't flinch. "Guess I'll make do," she whispered. Meanwhile, Flint leaned in the doorway like a judge watching a trial. "Let's see what the Rosebell cook can do now," he muttered, referring to her old job at a mining camp, famous for feeding workers but infamous for its disasters. She ignored him, set water to boil, and started slicing onions with the speed of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. In the corner, Cole, the hidden ranch owner, silently watched. He could have spoken up, could have called off the test, but something about her grit intrigued him. He knew this land tested people. Better to let the land do the talking. An hour in, the fire sputtered. Smoke clogged the room, stinging Eva's eyes. She coughed, fumbled with the damp wood, and that's when a burlap sack landed at her feet. Flour, clean, dry. She looked up. It was Cole. No words, just a nod. She blinked, almost smiled, but didn't thank him out loud. Not with Flint nearby. This was a quiet kind of alliance, one born in smoke and silence. By 4 in the morning, the scent of biscuits, stew, and fresh cornbread filled the cookhouse. Cowboys shuffled in, half asleep, drawn by smells they hadn't experienced in weeks. Big Dan, the ranch's wrangler, took one bite and whistled. "I'll be damned. Tastes like home." By sunrise, 30 men sat, fed, warmed, and stunned. Flint tossed her a silver dollar. "You won this round," he said, not unkindly. But Cole, he didn't say a word, just lingered near the stove, eyes on Eva, not with judgment, but with something closer to respect. And just like that, a quiet storm began to brew. one made of secrets, stolen glances, and strength neither of them could yet name. Bluebird rides in. Sunlight cracked the icy horizon, and with it came a thunder of hooves. Dust mixed with snow as a rider appeared, her coat flapping like wings, her horse dancing beneath her like wind caught in leather. Elena Ruiz, known on every trail as Bluebird, wasn't the kind to ask for welcome. She brought it with her like a storm you didn't mind weathering. Eva watched from the porch, apron dusted in flour. Bluebird dismounted with ease, tying off her string of mustangs like they were puppies, not wild creatures bred for battle. She had dark eyes full of sparks and a laugh that rolled across the ranch yard like distant thunder. The men gathered, partly curious, partly nervous. Women in this world weren't rare, but women like Bluebird, they made you question your spine. Bluebird sized up Eva in a glance. Not in a mean way, just curious. "Cook?" she asked. "Tryin'," Eva replied. Bluebird looked past her shoulder into the cookhouse. "That stew smells like my grandmother's. If you didn't burn the biscuits, you're already better than half the trail cooks I've met." Eva smirked. "Didn't burn a one." That's how it started, a bond built on burnt fingers and shared survival. Over coffee and cornbread, they swapped tales. Bluebird spoke of towns that vanished overnight, horses that would only respond to songs, and once, how she survived a mountain storm with nothing but a tarp and grit. Eva didn't match her story for story. She didn't have to. Bluebird saw her hands, knuckles scraped, wrists red from boiling pots. She nodded. "You've survived things too." This friendship, it became the ranch's unspoken soul. Where the men fought with spurs and fists, these two fought with kindness and truth. And the effect? Quiet but deep. Cowboys who never said please began waiting in line. Flint, for all his roughness, started cleaning his boots before stepping inside. And Cole? He noticed. Not just Eva's strength, but how the ranch itself shifted around her and Bluebird. A new kind of order was settling in, one led by courage, not control. And out here on the frontier, that kind of change could shake the ground harder than any stampede. Shadows at the drift fence. A few days after Bluebird's arrival, the snow thickened, the wind grew meaner, and something darker slipped into the ranch, like smoke under a door. They called him Silas Grant, but most folks whispered Sundown behind his back. A gambler, drifter, and former cattleman whose hands had long since traded reins for dice. He rode in wearing a red duster like he'd stepped out of a saloon legend. Sharp boots, sharper eyes, and a grin that never touched his heart. The ranch hands, half bored from snowed-in routines, welcomed the distraction. Around the bunkhouse fire, Sundown spun stories about poker in Deadwood and nearly marrying a schoolteacher who turned out to be an outlaw. The men laughed, passed whiskey, and missed the warning signs. But Eva didn't. She'd seen charm used like a blade before, and she spotted something strange, just a flash of it. As Sundown untied his saddlebag, a scrap of hide slipped out, caught on a buckle. She caught sight of it by accident, a piece of steer skin, and not just any steer. It carried the Stone River brand, sliced clean like someone had cut it to hide it. Her stomach dropped. That same evening, Bluebird was inspecting hoofprints near the drift fence, where ranch boundaries blur into wilderness. She found tracks, fresh ones, that split off from the main herd trail. Someone was driving cattle out, quietly, steadily, like they didn't want to be seen. Bluebird shared her findings in the cookhouse, speaking low while Eva stirred beans. "Someone's bleeding your herd," she said. Eva met her eyes. "Not your, his." Her head tilted subtly toward Cole, who, like always, was nearby, but silent. That's when Bluebird's eyes narrowed. He's not just a hand, is he? Eva shook her head slowly. He's the one this land belongs to. Cole Rivers. It clicked like a trap snapping shut. If Sundown was stealing cattle, and if Cole was hiding behind a false name, then whatever came next wasn't just about beef and land. It was about survival, power, and the moment when every secret would either save them or break them. And with the blizzard thickening and tempers growing shorter, they all knew something was coming. Something big. A name carved in silence. That night, the storm settled in like a beast curling to sleep. Snow pressed against windows. The wind didn't scream. It murmured, like it knew things were about to unravel. Inside the cookhouse, the fire crackled low, and Eva found herself alone with Cole. Bluebird had turned in. The hands were in the bunkhouse. Just the two of them now, surrounded by warmth, shadows, and unspoken truths. Cole was quiet, as always, until he finally said, "You figured it out, didn't you?" Eva didn't answer right away. She stirred the stew, poured 2 tin cups of coffee, passed one to him. "Your eyes give you away," she said. "Same ones in that old painting in the hall." He chuckled softly. "That obvious?" She nodded. "To anyone paying attention." What followed wasn't grand. No dramatic declarations. Just 2 people sharing truths the way cowboys share fire on cold nights. Carefully, like it might burn too fast. He told her how he grew up as the owner's son, but left after a drunken decision, cost a man his horse and nearly his life. He didn't want the land handed to him. He wanted to earn it, on his terms. Eva, in turn, shared stories of her years at the Rosebell kitchen, how the cookhouse was run like a kingdom, and she was always the servant, even when her meals brought miners to tears. "I never had a title," she said. "Just work, that's all I've ever been." Cole stared into the fire. "You think we're even then? Me hiding my name, you hiding your worth?" She met his gaze, firm. "Yeah, guess we are." For a long moment, silence held between them. Not the cold kind, but the kind that says, "I see you, really see you." And in that quiet, a bond formed, not built on attraction or need, but on something rarer out here: respect. Out in the cold wilds of Montana, that kind of bond could change everything. When the herd runs red. By the next evening, a strange hush fell over the ranch. Not from peace, but from pressure, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Flint called for a night cattle drive, claiming they had to beat the coming storm. "We move the herd now or we lose 'em," he barked, pacing before the bunkhouse. Some of the hands muttered under their breath, uneasy. Bluebird squinted into the snowfall, sensing something didn't add up. Eva, now part of the daily hum of the ranch, moved between cooking and quiet listening. She noticed how Sundown avoided eye contact, how Red Callahan, one of the more hot-headed cowhands, suddenly seemed too interested in the tack shed's contents. Then, as dusk sank lower, she spotted something odd. Sundown at the far end of the ridge, swinging a lantern. It blinked once, then twice. A signal. She didn't wait. Eva ran to find Bluebird, breath misting in the freezing air. "He's guiding someone in," she said. "That lantern, it wasn't for light. It was a signal." Bluebird mounted without a word. Together they traced the hoofprints splitting off from the main herd path, leading not toward winter pasture but toward the Badlands, toward rustler country. Meanwhile, Cole had joined the drive under cover of his usual quiet disguise. But when he saw Eva and Bluebird ride up, urgency in their eyes, he turned his horse without question. They galloped back toward the main herd, toward the trap, and that's when it happened. A shot rang out. One of the longhorns spooked. The rest followed. In a matter of seconds, the herd became a thunderous blur. hooves pounding frozen earth, steam rising from their flanks like war horses, a stampede. Ava's horse bucked at the sound. She clung to the reins, panic rising. The cattle split the trail like a river splitting rock. Ice cracked beneath them as they charged towards the creek. Cole reached her just as her mount slipped. With one swing, he hauled her onto his own horse. Together they raced, ducking low as steers thundered past them, the sound like cannons echoing across the plain. One steer skidded on ice and broke through. Water and ice exploded into the air. The others veered, barely missing the same fate. It was chaos, wild, beautiful, terrifying. And by the time it ended, with cowhands wrangling the last strays back to line, something else had broken wide open. Whatever peace the ranch had known was now gone, because a war for the Stone River had officially begun. Betrayal at Dead Horse Gulch. By morning, nothing felt normal. The herd was shaken, several cows missing, and tempers frayed to snapping. But Ava wasn't waiting around. She had proof now. She'd snuck into the tack shed the night before and found more hide scraps, all branded, all hidden under old saddle blankets. She knew what it meant. So did Bluebird. But they needed Cole to confirm it. They met him by the old corral. The wind had finally slowed, but the cold still bit hard. Eva handed him the leather. He examined it slowly, his face unreadable. "It's ours," he said at last. "No question." Then Flint appeared, flanked by Sundown and Red Callahan. "We got bigger problems than scraps," Flint said. "Storms cutting off the north trail. We need to burn the feed shed to draw off the herd and buy time." Eva's gut turned. That was it, Flint's plan. Burn the shed, blame the weather, sneak the missing cattle out under the smoke. But then Cole did something no one expected. He stepped forward, pulled off his gloves, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This ranch isn't Flint's to run, it's mine." The silence that followed was loud. "My name is Cole Rivers. My father built Stone River from nothing but fence wire and frostbite. I walked away years ago to earn what I have, but I never gave it up." Eyes widened. Even Flint took a step back. "I've been working beside you, same as anyone," Cole continued. "I know who pulls weight, and I know who's been bleeding us dry." Red drew his gun. Bluebird already had hers out. What followed was short, violent, and over in seconds. Red fired once, missed. Flint tried to run. Bluebird tackled him. Sundown took a bullet in the leg and tried to lie his way free, but it was done. The truth had landed, and the lines of loyalty had redrawn. From that moment, the fight wasn't about who worked hardest. It was about who stood for what was right. And out here on Stone River Ranch, justice had finally arrived, with smoke on the wind and fire in their veins. Fire, lead, and sourdough courage. The wind roared that night like it knew the ranch was on edge. It pushed against every board, rattled every window, and seemed to whisper threats in the dark. Eva was back in the cookhouse, alone with her thoughts and her ledger, the book she'd carried through years and places most folks wouldn't dare travel. It wasn't just recipes, it held memories, her mother's cinnamon biscuits, a miner's stew that saved a sick child, notes in the margins written with greasy thumbs and a tired heart. Then came the smell. Smoke, but not the usual kind, not from the stove. She rushed to the window, and there it was, flames licking the roof edge, sparks carried by the wind. The tack shed, already set aflame, had jumped. The cookhouse was catching. Her cookhouse. She didn't hesitate. Eva ran for the ledger, held it tight to her chest, then turned to leave, only to find fire climbing the doorframe. The back exit was already blocked. Heat rose fast. Smoke filled her lungs. For a second, panic grabbed her. Then he was there. Cole crashed through the side door like a thunderbolt, coat smoldering, eyes fierce. "Come on!" he shouted, grabbing her wrist. She protested, "The pantry!" But he shook his head. "You matter more than beans." They burst out just as a section of roof gave way behind them. Flames burst skyward, lighting the yard like a false sunrise. Across the way, Bluebird and 3 loyal hands had set up barricades at the corral, rifles out. Red was gone, fled into the storm's edge. Flint and Sundown were bound and shoved into the tack shed, their power extinguished by truth and bullet wounds. But the fire was only half the battle. It was what it symbolized, a last desperate strike by those who couldn't stand losing control. Eva, coughing and shaking, stood in the snow, the fire behind her, and Cole beside her. He checked her for burns, and when she showed him the ledger still held tight to her chest, he smiled. "Sourdough courage," he said. "That's what you've got." The fire took the walls, the ceiling, and most of the food stores. But it didn't take her spirit, and it didn't break the ranch. Dawn over an empty table. The morning after the fire came without fanfare. The snow had stopped. The air was still. For once, it felt like the land was listening. The cookhouse was a skeleton, smoke curling from blackened beams. The tack shed, a ruin. But no one stood alone. Cowboys carried buckets, nails, blankets. Bluebird passed out coffee from a pot balanced on a fire brick. And Eva, soot on her face and recipe book under her arm, looked out at the people gathered, not broken, just tired and ready. Cole approached, stepping carefully on the icy planks. "It's yours," he said simply. "What is?" she asked. "The kitchen. Whatever's left of it." She stared at him, not sure if he meant it. Not just ownership, but trust, partnership, a future. "But Eva," she didn't come this far to settle. "I don't want just a kitchen," she said. "I want the bunkhouse too. Clear it out, build long tables, beds upstairs, call it the Trail Inn. No one rides through this land hungry again." Cole blinked, then smiled. "You think big. You said this ranch was built by your father. Let's build the next part together." He didn't answer with words, just nodded, and that was enough. Around them, the crew nodded too. Bluebird tipped her hat. Even Flint, bandaged and seated under watch, didn't argue. Something bigger than ownership had taken root. By noon, they'd cleared out the first space in the bunkhouse. Bluebird brought in old saddles as stools. Big Dan started roasting a haunch over open flame. Someone found a fiddle. The table wasn't full. The walls were bare, but it was alive. And out here, in a land where survival was its own kind of celebration, that meant everything. The warmest place in Montana. 2 years passed like dust over the plains, slow, steady, and full of stories. Where the cookhouse once stood, now sat something remarkable. The Trail Inn, as Eva had dreamed, rose with wide open doors and a scent of coffee and cinnamon biscuits that could stop a cowboy in his tracks. No sign hung above the entrance, just the smell and the warmth that pulled riders in from across Montana. Inside, long pine tables stretched from wall to wall. Lanterns glowed golden. Horses breathed steam out front while their riders warmed their hands beside cast-iron stoves. On any given evening, you could hear fiddles, spoons tapping mugs, and laughter. Real laughter, not the guarded kind. Eva ran it all with quiet pride. Her ledger now had pages added by cowboys, ranch wives, and trail scouts. Recipes, notes, little sketches from kids passing through. It had become something more than a cookbook. It was a history of the forgotten voices of the West. Bluebird? She stayed. The Mustang she once wrangled for profit now grazed in her own pasture behind the inn. She taught local girls to ride and shoot and speak their minds. "Doesn't matter if your boots are new or hand-me-down," she'd say. "If you stand your ground, they'll fit just fine." And Cole, he never hid his name again. But he didn't run the ranch from an office or bark orders from a porch. He worked beside his crew, dirt under his nails, the same as them. And every evening, just before sundown, he'd sit across from Eva, share coffee and cornbread, and talk about what needed fixing next. The Stone River Ranch wasn't just land anymore. It was a beacon. Word spread fast about the trail inn where no traveler left hungry, where a woman ran the kitchen like a general and the horses knew the sound of Bluebird's whistle. Cowboys from miles away altered routes just to pass through. They say Montana is cold, harsh, unforgiving. But if you ask those who rode through Stone River, they'd tell you this: the warmest place in Montana isn't by a fire, it's around that table, where secrets were shared, legends were born, and a woman with flour on her face taught the West what courage really looked like. So if you love Wild West romance, hidden ranch owner stories, or tales of real frontier grit, hit subscribe, stay close, and come back soon. Because out here, every fire has a story, and we're just getting started.